Heated confrontation after a second-round match at the U.S. Open here in New York, after Jeļena Ostapenko lost.
What if a single sentence spoken in the heat of defeat could destroy an athlete's career and set the entire tennis world on fire? That's exactly what happened on a late August evening at the U.S. Open, a night that should have been remembered for one of the greatest upsets in American tennis, but instead spiraled into one of the most controversial scandals the sport has ever seen. Taylor Townsend, a player ranked far outside the top 100 in singles, walked onto court 11 with nothing to lose. Facing Jeļena Ostapenko, the fiery Latvian star and former French Open champion, most fans expected a routine win for the seeded favorite. On paper, the odds were stacked against Townsend. She was supposed to be another stepping stone, another easy victory. But tennis doesn't care about on paper. It cares about heart, momentum, and the hunger to prove the world wrong. And that's exactly what Townsend did. From the very first game, her energy was electric. Her serves cracked through the court, her returns landed with precision, and every rally pushed Ostapenko closer to the edge. The first set was tight, the tension razor sharp, but Townsend stole at 7-5. The crowd roared. By the second set, something had shifted. Ostapenko cracked under the pressure while Townsend elevated her game to another level. 6-1. Game, set, match. A seismic upset. The stadium erupted in celebration. American fans embraced the underdog's triumph. This was the story everyone wanted. The overlooked player defeating a Grand Slam champion on home soil, proving that dreams are never too far-fetched. But then, it all fell apart. Instead of a handshake of mutual respect, instead of congratulations, Ostapenko let her fury boil over. The microphones picked it up, the cameras caught it in perfect clarity. She leaned across the net and spat out words that no one could quite believe they were hearing. "You have no class. You have no education." The crowd froze, then erupted in boos. It wasn't just the insult itself. It was the venom, the repetition. Ostapenko said it not once, but 3 times. "You have no education. You have no education. You have no education." Her voice dripping with disdain, her face twisted in anger. And standing across from her was Taylor Townsend, a black American woman who had just achieved the biggest singles victory of her career, only to be humiliated and on live television at the very moment she should have been celebrating. The atmosphere flipped in an instant. The cheers turned to jeers. Thousands of fans booed, not at Townsend but at Ostapenko, disgusted by what they had just witnessed. Commentators were stunned into silence. Social media ignited within seconds, clips spreading like wildfire across Twitter and Instagram. Because this wasn't just poor sportsmanship. This wasn't just a tantrum. It felt like something uglier, something heavier, something that touched on the raw nerves of race, respect, and the long history of how black athletes have been treated in tennis. For Townsend, it was supposed to be the happiest moment of her career, but instead of basking in glory, she was forced to process an attack that went far beyond tennis etiquette. And as fans debated in shock and anger, one question echoed louder than all others. How could a professional athlete think she could say something like that and walk away without consequences? And that's where our story truly begins. Because what followed in the hours and days after wasn't just drama on a tennis court. It was a storm that shook the sport to its very core. The boos were still echoing around court 11 as Jeļena Ostapenko stormed off, her reputation trailing behind her like smoke after an explosion. Meanwhile, Taylor Townsend stood frozen, absorbing the moment. She had just taken down a former Grand Slam champion at the U.S. Open, but instead of lifting her arms in triumph, she was left trying to process the sting of words meant to belittle her very identity. Reporters rushed in, microphones ready, eager to ignite the firestorm. Townsend, remarkably composed, responded with a calm that stunned everyone. It's competition. People get upset when they lose. Some people say things. Still, there's no beef. But like you saw, I didn't back down. You're not going to insult me, especially after I carried myself with respect. Respect. That single word hung in the air. Because in that moment, Townsend displayed more dignity than Ostapenko had shown in her entire outburst. The contrast could not have been sharper. One player rising above, the other sinking into chaos. But for Ostapenko, the story wasn't over. In fact, it was only beginning. Within hours, clips of her comments flooded social media, dissected frame by fans, journalists, and even the lip-reading experts. What they discovered was damning. Ostapenko's words went beyond the already shocking no education. There were other insults, too. Harsher, uglier, more personal. words that would be difficult to defend as mere heat-of-the-moment frustration. So how did Ostapenko respond? She doubled down. In an Instagram post that same night, she tried to justify herself. She claimed the confrontation started because Townsend had failed to apologize for a lucky net cord point, a ball that clipped the net and still went over. In tennis etiquette, it's customary to raise a hand as a courtesy. Townsend hadn't done it, and Ostapenko claimed this was the trigger. Think about that for a second. One of the most humiliating and racially charged insults in recent tennis memory. Sparked, according to Ostapenko, by a missed sorry. A piece of unwritten etiquette. A courtesy. Not a rule, just an unspoken gesture. And yet, Ostapenko thought this justified a meltdown that would overshadow her entire career. 3 days later, facing global backlash, Ostapenko attempted damage control. She posted an apology on Instagram, but it wasn't really an apology. It was a PR statement, polished and hollow. She claimed that English wasn't her first language, and that when she said education, she only meant tennis etiquette. Really? After more than a decade of doing press conferences in fluent English? After repeating it 3 times, loud and clear, for the world to hear? The fans weren't buying it. Neither were players. And here's what made it worse. She didn't even mention Taylor Townsend by name. She didn't acknowledge the racial undertones. She didn't take responsibility. It was a classic non-apology designed not to heal wounds, but to stop the bleeding of sponsorships and headlines. Meanwhile, Taylor Townsend was writing her own narrative. Just days later, she stepped back onto the court, facing the world's number 5 seed. And what did she do? She dominated. Straight sets. No hesitation. Wearing an outfit with flames on the sleeves, she looked like a phoenix rising from the ashes, and fans embraced the symbolism. While Ostapenko was defending herself on Instagram, Townsend was proving herself on the court. Sponsors began to take notice. So did commentators. The storyline flipped. Ostapenko, the disgraced star, consumed by negativity. Townsend, the resilient warrior, climbing higher with every match. One was trapped in the past. The other was blazing into the future. The tennis world now had a choice. Ignore the scandals, sweep it under the rug, or confront the uncomfortable truth it exposed. And as the headlines grew louder, the WTA found itself in a pressure cooker. Fans demanded punishment. Journalists demanded accountability. Could they really look the other way when the whole world was watching? But to truly understand on why this scandal hit so hard and why Townsend's dignity meant so much, we need to look back through the history of tennis, back to battles fought long before this night. To understand why Jeļena Ostapenko's words detonated like a bomb, you have to look beyond the surface. This wasn't just about 2 players arguing at the net. This was about history, about identity, about a sport that has, for decades, struggled to reconcile with questions of race, respect, and who truly belongs. Tennis likes to sell itself as a game of elegance, of manners, of pristine white clothing on grass courts and polite applause from the stands. But behind that facade, there's a long history of double standards. And for black athletes, the burden has always been heavier. Go back to the 1950s. Althea Gibson, the first black player to break into elite tennis, was constantly described not just by her skill, but by her attitude. She was scrutinized for every reaction, every word, forced to prove not only that she could play, but that she could behave. Fast forward to the 1990s and 2000s, and you find Serena and Venus Williams walking onto the same stage, 2 of the greatest players the game has ever seen. And yet they too were met with skepticism. Serena's passion was often called anger. Venus's intelligence was questioned despite her being one of the sharpest minds in sport. And now, in 2025, Taylor Townsend finds herself walking that same path. When Ostapenko told her, "You have no education," she wasn't just insulting a fellow competitor. She was striking a nerve that runs deep in the veins of tennis. To say that to a black athlete, in a sport where black players have had to fight tooth and nail for respect, is more than poor sportsmanship. It's a reminder of an old wound, still raw. Naomi Osaka understood this immediately. She spoke out publicly, calling Ostapenko's words some of the worst you could say to a black player. Osaka knows. She herself has been on the receiving end of unfair criticism, treated as too emotional or too outspoken. Her voice, like Serena's before her, reminded the world that this wasn't an isolated insult. It was part of a much bigger picture. And here's where the hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore. Time and again, white players have thrown tantrums on court, John McEnroe screamed at umpires for years and became a legend for his fire. Nika Kyrgios has smashed rackets and hurled abuse, and commentators call it colorful. Even Ostapenko herself has had a reputation for dramatic outbursts, but until now, they were brushed off as part of her fiery personality. But when a black player so much as frowns, or fails to say sorry for a lucky net cord, suddenly they're disrespectful. Uneducated. Lacking class. That's the double standard. That's the weight Townsend carried the moment those words were thrown at her. Yet what makes this story remarkable isn't just the injustice, it's the response. Townsend didn't crumble. She didn't lash out. She stood tall, met insult with composure, and turned the spotlight away from Ostapenko's bitterness and onto her own strength. In that moment, she embodied everything the sport claims to value. Grace, discipline, resilience. Fans recognized it, commentators recognized it, and slowly, even the institutions that had often looked the other way found themselves unable to ignore the storm. Because this wasn't just about one match. It was about what tennis chooses to stand for, and who it chooses to protect. And that leaves us with the most pressing question of all. If the sport is truly serious about fairness, how will it handle a scandal like this? Will it confront its own contradictions, or let history repeat itself once again? By the time the dust began to settle, the contrast between the two women could not have been sharper. On one side was Jeļena Ostapenko, a Grand Slam champion once celebrated for her fearless ball striking and fiery personality, now trapped under the weight of her own words. On the other side stood Taylor Townsend, unseated, underestimated, a mother balancing life on and off the court, rising higher with every match, her reputation glowing brighter with every step she took forward. Sponsors knew it, fans knew it, even the WTA, reluctant at first, could no longer ignore it, because the scandal was no longer just about a net cord point or a missed apology. It had become a symbol, a mirror held up to tennis, forcing the sport to see itself. Its biases, its history, its double standards. For Ostapenko, the consequences were swift and brutal. Media headlines painted her as arrogant, unrepentant, a player unwilling to face the weight of what she had said. Brands quietly distanced themselves. Tournament organizers whispered behind closed doors, weighing whether her presence was worth the backlash. And perhaps most damaging of all, her reputation among her peers was fractured. Tennis is built not only on skill, but on respect. And once that's gone, it's nearly impossible to reclaim. Meanwhile, Townsend was writing her own comeback story. Match by match, she climbed higher. For the first time in her career, she reached the fourth round of a Grand Slam singles draw, her deepest run yet. But more importantly, she had captured something far more enduring, the admiration of fans around the world. People saw her not only as a player, but as a symbol of dignity in the face of disrespect. A phoenix rising not from one victory, but from years of being underestimated. The irony couldn't be missed. Ostapenko, who had once hoisted the French Open trophy, was now defined not by her triumphs, but by her tantrum. Townsend, who had long been fighting for recognition, was suddenly celebrated as the future of American tennis. A reminder that sometimes the underdog's greatest victory isn't on the scoreboard, but in how they carry themselves when tested. And this, in many ways, is the essence of sport. Because tennis isn't just about forehands and backhands, aces and double faults. It's about respect. It's about how champions treat each other when the stakes are highest, when the cameras are rolling, when the emotions boil over. Words matter. Actions matter. And in today's world, where everything's recorded, shared, and judged in real time, they matter more than ever. Taylor Townsend walked into the U.S. Open as an underdog. She walked out as something far greater, a symbol of resilience, dignity, and quiet strength. Jeļena Ostapenko, meanwhile, was forced to learn the hardest lesson of all. You can win a trophy in Paris, but lose your reputation in New York. And so, the question remains, what will tennis do now? Will the sport finally confront its double standards and ensure that respect is more than just a slogan? Or will it allow moments like this to repeat, leaving the same wounds unhealed? That's for the future to decide. But one thing is certain, Taylor Townsend didn't just win a match. She won something far greater. She won hearts. What do you think? Should the WTA hand down harsher penalties for words that cross the line? Or is the court of public opinion already the harshest punishment of all? If this story made you think, if it shocked you, or if it reminded you of the power of dignity in the face of insult, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the drama behind the game. and tell me in the comments. Is tennis finally ready to change,